Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name. Welcome to the Revelation 13 podcast. The Revelation 13 podcast presents Breaking News.
Hello and welcome to the Revelation 13 podcast. I'm your host, Mike Hopwood, and welcome to the first news update program. We'll start off with Rapture Ready news. Federal tax revenues plummeting. The recession is starving the government of tax revenues, just as the President and Congress are piling on a major expansion of health care and other programs on the nation's plate and struggling to find money to pay for the tab. The numbers can hardly be more stark. Tax receipts are on a pace to drop 18% this year, the biggest single decline since the Great Depression, while the federal deficit balloons to a record $1.8 trillion. The Obama's going to have a big problem. He keeps wanting to spend, but with less and less money, and it's going to cause big problems with inflation. And even though we may have growth and supposedly out of the recession by the end of the year, as some people are trying to speculate, I don't think it's, they're not taking into account certain things that may happen, like a war breaking out in the Middle East, or even just the gas prices creeping up, which right now they seem to be creeping up a little bit. Anything can negate any progress that we're making. And usually when these forecasters come out, part of what they do is try to talk up the economy. They want people to spend more because, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Because what they're doing is they're taking a snapshot and saying, looking into the future and saying, well, if this continues and that continues and all these blocks fall into place like they seem that they are, we'll be out of it. But all those things have to fall into place, and nothing can come and knock them over. And we have evidence to believe that, something may happen between them to derail it, or even we might have come out of it a little bit. But with the deficits and the potential of inflation coming, it's going to cause more problems down the road, and therefore it might only be a temporary recovery. And now from the Times Online. Residents flee China's quarantine plague town. Frightened residents of a Chinese town sealed off after an outbreak of pneumonic plague have begun to flee under cover of darkness, sneaking around checkpoints set up to stop the spread of one of the world's deadliest diseases. Residents said that the streets of Zhigtan, a town in the mainly ethnically Tibetan region of western China, were deserted as medical staff raced to disinfect the area amid reports of a third person had died of a highly contagious illness. After the outbreak was detected last Thursday, police set up checkpoints in a 17-mile radius of the farming community of about 10,000 people, but Tibetan residents familiar with the rugged and wild terrain have begun to slip out of the town, evading the checkpoints. One person had made his way to a neighborhood province but declined to give his exact location. Others, he believed, had made their way out of the city of Xi'an, the capital of Qingsha province. Still others have taken refuge with friends and relatives, still living a nomadic existence in the Tibetan plateau. Many people have left. They have just escaped. The streets are virtually empty now, he said. Outbreaks of the plague in such a populated region are extremely rare. Occasional cases have been reported in western China, usually in the Tibetan areas, over the past couple of decades, but most all have been limited to herders in remote areas who were infected with earlier pneumonic or bubonic plague after eating wild marmots or being infected by fleas carried by rats. Such outbreaks are much easier to control. However, more herders have been moved into towns in recent years as a part of a policy by the authorities to provide permanent housing for nomads and establish greater control over the Tibetans. The first death was of a herdsman who succumbed to the plague 3 days after buying his dog, which had died suddenly. Another 11 people, friends and relatives, became infected after attending the man's funeral. Pneumonic plague is spread through the air and can be passed from person to person through coughing. The latest victim was a 64-year-old man named Dazi. He was a neighbor of the 32-year-old herdsman and a 37-year-old man who died at that weekend. Another 9 people are infected in the hospital, according to the local health bureau. There have been no reports of new cases since the weekend, and officials say that the outbreak is under control. Sometimes with China, though, you never know if it truly is under control because of the Chinese who have in the past underreported and infections of previous diseases. WorldNet Daily has an article, Proof Obamacare Will Lead to Medical Murder. Why Health Plan Could Result in Early Deaths of Millions of Baby Boomers. Imagine lying in some government-run hospital, hospice, or nursing home many years from now. Imagine languishing unattended for days in soiled sheets, suffering from hunger and thirst, covered with bed sores, your flesh aboil with untreated infections. Imagine living in fear of resentful, underpaid health aides who take out their anger on you and abuse you. And imagine spending your final moments on earth in the company of a government healthcare worker with a syringe who injects you with a lethal cocktail. Do you find all this hard to imagine? You should. In any civilized country, such things should not happen, ever. But President Obama's healthcare proposals have the very real potential to turn this nightmare into reality for many Americans, according to an in-depth investigation reported in the August edition of the Whistleblower magazine titled Medical Murder: Why Obamacare Could Result in the Early Death of Millions of Baby Boomers.